This is number 10 on our list, Yasuke, the African samurai who rose from outsider to legend in Japan. When Yasuke first set foot in Japan in 1579, he was not a warrior. He arrived as the servant of Jesuit missionaries, likely hailing from Mozambique or Sudan, though his exact origins remain debated. At the time, Japan was fractured by civil war. Powerful warlords, known as daimyo, fought for dominance, and one of the most ambitious of all was Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga was fascinated by the foreign world beyond Japan's shores. When Yasuke entered Kyoto with the missionaries, his presence caused a sensation. Standing over 6 feet tall, towering above most Japanese men of the era, and with skin unlike anything the people had ever seen. Crowds gathered in the thousands just to catch a glimpse. Some even suspected he had been painted black with ink, until he scrubbed his skin to prove otherwise. News of this remarkable man reached Nobunaga, who summoned Yasuke to his court. Nobunaga was not easily impressed, but he found Yasuke extraordinary. Strength, intelligence, and loyalty stood out, and Nobunaga saw potential far beyond servitude. Yasuke was welcomed into his inner circle, a position unheard of for a foreigner at the time. In a society rigidly bound by class and ancestry, Nobunaga did something revolutionary. He made Yasuke a samurai. This was no honorary title. Yasuke was given a residence, servants of his own, and a katana, the soul of the samurai. He trained and fought alongside Nobunaga's warriors, riding into battle in one of the most violent eras of Japanese history. Visualize the great Japanese castles rising against the sky, banners snapping in the wind, and Yasuke clad in armor, a towering presence on the battlefield. His dark skin gleamed against polished steel, a sight that made him stand out even among Nobunaga's fiercest warriors. He became more than a curiosity. He was a symbol of Nobunaga's openness to talent, wherever it appeared. In 1582, Yasuke's loyalty was put to the ultimate test. Nobunaga was betrayed by one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, and forced into a desperate final stand at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto. Yasuke fought at Nobunaga's side in this last hopeless battle. Nobunaga ultimately chose ritual suicide over capture, ending his legendary campaign to unify Japan. Yasuke survived the chaos. Captured by Mitsuhide's forces, he faced a choice. Because he was not Japanese, some accounts say he was spared execution and returned to the Jesuits. Others suggest he continued to fight, his fate lost to history. What is certain is that Yasuke's story left a mark on Japan. He was remembered as a true samurai, one who rose from foreign origins to stand among Japan's greatest warriors. Today, Yasuke has become a cultural icon. His life has inspired novels, films, and anime, capturing imaginations as the African who became a samurai in a land that rarely accepted outsiders. His story challenges our assumptions about identity, belonging, and the rigid lines of history. From servant to warrior, from outsider to legend. Yasuke stands as proof that greatness can be recognized across boundaries of race, culture, and nation. He may not have left behind descendants or estates, but his legacy endures. When we think of the samurai, we often imagine stoic Japanese warriors sworn to loyalty and honor. But among them once stood Yasuke, the African samurai, and that makes him more than worthy of the number 10 spot on our list. Next, we move to number 9, a warrior whose ferocity was so great it became the stuff of nightmares. And he meant it. Born in 1906, Jack Churchill was a man made for adventure. He was a skilled archer, a championship bagpiper, and an officer in the British Army. When World War II broke out, instead of conforming to the age of tanks and automatic weapons, he reached back centuries for his tools of war, a longbow, a set of bagpipes, and a Scottish broadsword strapped to his side. In 1940, as the British Expeditionary Force retreated through France, Mad Jack made his mark. During an ambush, he raised his longbow and fired a steel-tipped arrow straight into a German soldier, the only confirmed longbow kill of the entire war. Afterward, he drew his broadsword and led charges that looked like something from medieval history, not modern Europe. Visualize a smoky battlefield, shells exploding, tracer rounds cutting the sky, and in the midst of it, a tall officer with a claymore sword raised high, charging forward. His presence was terrifying for the enemy and inspiring for his men. Churchill soon became known for daring raids with Britain's commando units. In Norway, he stormed enemy positions with bagpipes under his arm, playing traditional Scottish tunes before drawing his sword and rushing into the fight. In one raid, he captured 42 German soldiers single-handedly, using nothing but his sword as intimidation. He didn't just fight with weapons. His courage was his greatest asset. In Yugoslavia in 1944, he fought alongside partisans, leading thousands through forests and villages against entrenched German forces. But eventually, luck turned. He was surrounded and captured. Even then, Mad Jack wouldn't give in. Sent to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp in Germany, he promptly escaped by crawling under barbed wire and marching miles to freedom. Recaptured, he was sent to Austria. Once again, as the war neared its end, he walked away from captivity, covering over 100 miles on foot until he reached Allied lines. When the war in Europe ended, most men were eager to go home. Not Jack Churchill. He asked to be transferred to the Pacific, hoping to continue fighting the Japanese with his sword in hand. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war before he could arrive. With peace declared, Mad Jack reportedly grumbled, "If it wasn't for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going another 10 years. Churchill lived on after the war, serving in military roles from Palestine to India, never quite fitting into ordinary life. He surfed, rode motorcycles, and played his bagpipes on long marches. He became a legend, a soldier who brought medieval weapons into the most mechanized war in history, and survived to tell the tale. It's stories like his that keep history alive. And if you're enjoying this countdown of hard-to-believe warriors, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss the rest of this incredible list. Mad Jack Churchill reminds us that courage isn't always about technology or numbers. Sometimes, it's about the spirit of one person willing to defy convention and inspire others with sheer audacity. And that's why he stands here at number 9. Next, we move to number 8, a warrior whose brutal skill turned him into one of the deadliest fighters of the ancient world. This is number 8 on our list, Tomoe Gozen, a woman who fought as fiercely as any man in samurai legend. In the late 12th century, Japan was torn apart by the Genpei War, a brutal conflict between the Minamoto and Taira clans for control of the nation. It was an age when the samurai were cementing their place as Japan's ruling warrior class. In this world of blood and banners, one figure stood out, not because she was different, but because she fought with a ferocity that demanded respect. Her name was Tomoe Gozen. Tomoe served under Minamoto no Yoshinaka, one of the key generals of the Minamoto clan. More than just a retainer, she was his trusted commander, famed for her unmatched skill with the bow and the sword. Chronicles describe her as exceptionally beautiful, with long flowing hair. But her reputation was forged in combat, not appearance. She rode into battle, armored head to toe, commanding men with a presence that no one dared question. In an age when women were expected to remain in the shadows, Tomoe Gozen charged headlong into war. Visualize banners of red and white snapping in the wind, war drums pounding across the field. And in the midst of it, a female samurai, her bow drawn tight, arrows cutting through the chaos. Before she swung her blade and cut down opponents one after another. The Heike Monogatari, Japan's great epic of the Genpei War, tells of her bravery. It describes her as a warrior, worth 1,000, ready to confront a demon or a god, mounted or on foot. She fought in decisive battles that shaped the fate of the country. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Yoshinaka's fiercest men, one of her most famous duels came near the end of the war. During the Battle of Awazu in 1184, Yoshinaka's forces were overwhelmed by rivals from his own clan. Knowing defeat was near, Tomoe refused to flee. Instead, she singled out one of the strongest enemy warriors, Ukeda Iyoshi, and rode straight for him. In front of hundreds of soldiers, she grappled him from his horse, tore off his head, and presented it as proof of her skill. It was a final act of defiance on a battlefield drowning in blood and fire. Her fate after this remains clouded in mystery. Some accounts say Yoshinaka, loyal to the samurai code, ordered her to leave the field rather than die beside him, believing it unworthy for a woman to perish in such a way. Others claim she fought to the very end, vanishing into legend after carving her path through the enemy. Later stories suggest she became a nun, retreating into a quiet life after years of war. Whatever the truth, Tomoe Gozen's name lived on. For centuries, she became a symbol of female strength and samurai honor. Plays, poems, and paintings celebrated her deeds. In a world where women were rarely allowed into the chronicles of power, Tomoe broke through. She became proof that valor had no gender. Imagine the battlefield of medieval Japan, banners falling, warriors locked in combat, and among them, a woman who commanded fear and admiration in equal measure. Tomoe Gozen's story is not just about a single warrior. It's about how legend preserves those who defy expectations. Her myth has endured for more than 800 years, shaping how Japan remembers its own past. This is why she earns her place as one of history's most hard-to-believe warriors. This is number 7 on our list. Khalid ibn al-Walid, a general who never lost a battle. Born around 592 CE in Mecca, Khalid ibn al-Walid grew up in a powerful clan of the Quraysh, skilled in horsemanship and warfare from an early age. His first major appearance in history was actually against the Prophet Muhammad. When he commanded Meccan cavalry at the Battle of Uhud in 6, it was Khalid who led the decisive flanking maneuver that turned the tide against the Muslims that day. Yet, in a twist of destiny, just a few years later, he converted to Islam. Once he pledged his sword to Muhammad, he became one of the faith's fiercest defenders. From that moment forward, Khalid's military genius became legendary. At the Battle of Mu'tah in 629, he faced the vastly larger Byzantine army, outnumbered and on the brink of annihilation. Khalid took command after the first 3 Muslim generals were killed. He executed a brilliant series of maneuvers, rotating the front lines and staging feigned retreats, convincing the Byzantines that reinforcements had arrived. Against the odds, he extracted the Muslim army with minimal losses. For this, Muhammad gave him the title Saif Allah, the Sword of God. Visualize the scene: dust swirling over desert plains, heavily armored cavalry clashing, banners snapping in the wind. In the chaos, Khalid directed his troops with calm precision, turning near-certain defeat into survival. After Muhammad's death, Khalid became the key military leader of the early caliphate. During the Ridda Wars, when Arabian tribes rebelled, he crushed the uprisings with swift cavalry strikes, uniting Arabia under Abu Bakr, the first caliph. From there, he turned outward, leading campaigns against the 2 superpowers of the age, the Byzantine and Sassanid, Persian empires. In 633, he marched into Iraq, defeating the Persians at battles like Welaha, where he executed one of history's earliest recorded double envelopments, a maneuver later compared to Hannibal at Cannae. His cavalry encircled the Persian forces, crushing them from both sides. Soon after, he turned west against the Byzantines in Syria. At the Battle of Yarmouk in 636, Khalid faced one of his greatest tests, vastly outnumbered by the Byzantine army. He orchestrated a 6-day battle across shifting terrain, using his cavalry to launch devastating flanking charges. The result was a decisive Muslim victory that broke Byzantine control of Syria forever. Yarmouk became one of the most significant battles of late antiquity, reshaping the map of the Middle East. What made Khalid so remarkable wasn't just his string of victories, it was his adaptability. Whether fighting Persians in open plains or Byzantines in mountain passes, he read the terrain, moved swiftly, and struck where the enemy was weakest. His reputation grew so great that his presence alone could terrify opponents. Yet, despite his unmatched success, Khalid's career ended not on the battlefield, but through politics. Caliph Umar, fearing that people glorified Khalid too much, removed him from command. Still, Khalid accepted the decision with loyalty, living out his final years quietly. When he died in 642, he expressed regret, not at his dismissal, but at the fact that, despite surviving countless battles, he died on a bed rather than in combat. Khalid ibn al-Walid's record remains unmatched: dozens of battles fought, none lost. His campaigns set the stage for the rapid expansion of the Islamic world, and his name has lived on as a symbol of unstoppable military genius. It's stories like this that keep history alive. If you're finding this countdown as fascinating as we are, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss the next unbelievable warrior on our list. Khalid ibn al-Walid. the Sword of God, earns his place here at number 7. This is number 6 on our list, Simo Häyhä, the sniper who became a nightmare in the snow. In 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland, expecting a swift victory against its smaller neighbor. What they didn't anticipate was the ferocity of the Finnish resistance during the Winter War. Among these defenders was a farmer-turned-soldier named Simo Häyhä, who would go on to become the deadliest sniper in history. He was a quiet man from Karelia, a rural region of Finland. He stood only about 5 feet tall and spoke little. Yet once the war began, he blended seamlessly into the snowy forests with his white camouflage suit, rifle in hand. For just over 3 months, he waged a one-man war against the Red Army. By the time it was over, he was credited with more than 500 confirmed kills, and possibly many more unrecorded. Unlike many snipers, he didn't use a scope. He preferred iron sights, believing they allowed him to aim faster and avoid the telltale glint of glass that could give away his position. He packed snow in front of his firing spot to muffle the sound and keep it from scattering under recoil. He even held snow in his mouth to hide the cloud of warm breath that might betray him in the icy air. Visualize the scene: endless forests of snow-covered pines, the silence broken only by the crack of a rifle. Soviet troops moved in columns, their dark uniforms stark against the white landscape. And one by one, they fell to a shot no one could see coming. To the Red Army, the unseen marksman became a figure of terror. They named him Belaya Smrt, the White Death. The Soviets tried everything to eliminate him. They launched artillery bombardments at suspected sniper nests, sent counter-snipers to track him, and deployed whole units to hunt him down. None succeeded. He moved silently, struck with precision, and vanished back into the snow. His most extraordinary feat was his consistency. Some days, he recorded over 20 kills. Others he spent silently observing, waiting for the perfect moment. His patience and discipline made him as effective as an entire company of soldiers. For the Red Army, facing He was not just a tactical setback, it was psychological warfare. Every soldier who entered the forest feared the invisible gunman watching them through the trees. But even legends can fall. In March 1940, near the end of the Winter War, he was shot in the face by an explosive round. The bullet tore through his jaw and cheek, leaving him horrifically wounded. For days, he lay unconscious, his survival uncertain. Yet, against all odds, he lived. He awoke on the very day peace was declared between Finland and the Soviet Union. Though his face was permanently disfigured, he recovered and lived to old age. After the war, he returned to his quiet life as a farmer and hunter, rarely speaking about his experiences. He remained humble, never boasting about his record. When asked how he achieved so much, he simply answered, "Practice." Simo Häyhä's tally of kills remains unmatched by any sniper in history, but his legend goes beyond numbers. He embodied the spirit of Finland's desperate defense, small, outnumbered, but fiercely determined. He proved how one man, with skill and patience, could hold back an army. Picture the snowfields again, silent, endless, and in them, the faint outline of a soldier in white, rifle steady, waiting. To his enemies, he was an invisible executioner. To his country, he was a hero who showed that courage and precision could change the course of a war. That is why Simo Häyhä, the White Death, earns his place at number 6 on our list of hard-to-believe warriors. This is number 5 on our list, Subutai, the Mongol general who outthought empires. When we think of the Mongol Empire, we often picture Genghis Khan, the fierce conqueror who built the largest land empire in history. But behind many of his victories, and those of his successors, was Subutai, a general whose mind was as sharp as any blade. Subutai was not born a nobleman or a warrior of high rank. He was the son of a blacksmith, yet rose to become the greatest strategist of the Mongol conquests, commanding more than 20 campaigns and winning nearly every battle he fought. Subutai first proved himself under Genghis Khan during the Wars of Unification in Mongolia. He mastered the use of the Mongol cavalry, turning horsemen into a weapon of unmatched mobility and precision. His genius was not just in commanding men, but in seeing the battlefield as a living puzzle. Terrain, timing, and deception were all pieces he could arrange to his advantage. In China, he oversaw sieges that broke through the walls of great cities. The Mongols, who had once been dismissed as steppe raiders, under Subutai's direction, adapted quickly, using captured engineers to build siege weapons like catapults and towers. Subutai orchestrated campaigns that crushed the Jin dynasty and laid the groundwork for the eventual conquest of the Song. His armies moved with astonishing speed, often covering distances in days that would take other armies weeks. But it was in the west where Subutai's brilliance truly stunned the world. In 1223, at the Battle of the Kolka River, he lured a combined force of Rus princes and steppe allies into a devastating ambush. Pretending to retreat, Subutai drew them into pursuit for 9 days. When the moment was right, he turned and annihilated them. It was the first taste Europe had of Mongol warfare, and it would not be the last. Visualize endless plains filled with galloping horsemen, arrows darkening the sky, and maps stretching from China to Hungary, marked with routes of conquest. Subutai was the architect of campaigns that spanned continents. Perhaps his most famous masterpiece came in 1241, leading Mongol forces into Europe. Subutai coordinated simultaneous invasions of Hungary and Poland. At the Battle of Legnica in Poland, Mongol forces crushed a European coalition, while at the same time, Subutai himself commanded the decisive victory at Mohi in Hungary, using feigned retreats, hidden fords, and encirclement. He destroyed armies many times the size of his own. In a matter of months, Europe lay open, vulnerable to Mongol advance. Only the death of the Great Khan in Mongolia forced Subutai to withdraw. His strategies were centuries ahead of their time. He combined mobility, intelligence gathering, and psychological warfare with devastating effect. Subutai was not just a tactician, he was a long-range planner. He could coordinate armies separated by hundreds of miles, timing their movements so perfectly that they struck in unison against unprepared enemies. Though less famous than Genghis Khan or Kublai Khan, Subutai was the empire's mastermind. He fought in more than 50 battles and conquered 32 nations, shaping the Mongol Empire's dominance across Eurasia. To put it simply, Genghis may have been the vision, but Subutai was the execution. In his later years, Subutai returned to Mongolia, honored but still restless. He died in 1248, just a few years after his European campaigns, leaving behind a legacy as one of the greatest generals in world history. His enemies remembered him not only for the destruction he wrought, but for the terrifying precision with which he wielded the Mongol war machine. Think of the vastness of Eurasia, stretching from the steppes of Mongolia to the forests of Europe. Few men in history could imagine conquering such distances. Subutai not only imagined it, he nearly achieved it. That is why Subutai, the blacksmith's son, who outthought empires, holds his place at number 5. This is number 4 on our list. Leonidas, the Spartan king who stood with 300 against an empire. In 480 BCE, Greece faced its greatest threat. King Xerxes of Persia marched west with an army so vast that ancient writers claimed it drank rivers dry. While those numbers were exaggerated, the Persian force still dwarfed anything the Greek city-states could field. Most of Greece trembled. But one man and one city stood ready to resist: Leonidas of Sparta. Leonidas was not originally destined to be king. He was the third son of the Spartan royal line, elevated only after the deaths of his brothers. But his upbringing was pure Spartan. From childhood, he endured the brutal Agoj training system, forged into a soldier through discipline, hardship, and relentless combat drills. By the time he took the throne, he was the embodiment of Spartan values: courage, endurance, and loyalty to the state above all else. When Xerxes advanced into Greece, the city-states debated whether to resist or submit. Athens and Sparta agreed to fight, and Leonidas was chosen to lead a small force to block the Persian advance at a narrow coastal pass called Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. This choke point neutralized Persia's advantage in numbers, forcing them to fight in tight quarters against heavily armored Greek hoplites. With him marched just 300 Spartan warriors, all men with living sons to carry on their names, along with a few thousand allied Greeks. Though vastly outnumbered, they believed the terrain gave them a fighting chance. Visualize the scene: a narrow defile between steep mountains and the sea, Greek spears bristling in phalanx formation, and waves of Persians crashing against them. For 2 days, Leonidas and his men held the line. Spartan training and discipline proved nearly impenetrable. Shield to shield, spear to spear, they drove back wave after wave of Persian assaults. Even the famed immortals, Xerxes' elite guard, could not break through. The Persian dead piled high in the pass, while the Greeks rotated fresh fighters into the line. But betrayal changed everything. A local Greek revealed a hidden mountain path to Xerxes, allowing Persian troops to flank the defenders. When Leonidas learned of this, he dismissed most of the allied forces, ordering them to retreat and fight another day. He remained with his 300 Spartans, a small band of Thespians and Thebans, and prepared for their final stand. On the third day, surrounded and doomed, Leonidas chose defiance. The Spartans fought with spears until they shattered, then with swords, and finally with bare hands and teeth. Leonidas himself fell in battle, his body contested by both sides. When the last Spartan died, the Persians finally took the pass. The sacrifice at Thermopylae was not in vain. It became a rallying cry for the Greek alliance. Just months later, Greek forces defeated the Persian navy at Salamis, and then crushed Xerxes' army at Plataea, driving the invaders back. Thermopylae proved that resistance, even in the face of overwhelming odds, could inspire unity and eventual victory. Leonidas' stand became legend. For the Spartans, it was the perfect expression of their code: better to die in battle than to surrender. For Greece as a whole, it became a symbol of freedom against tyranny. The story has echoed across centuries, retold in histories, poems, and modern films. His words, recorded by Herodotus, still resonate: "Molen lab, come and take them," said in defiance when Xerxes demanded the Spartans lay down their weapons. Picture again the narrow pass, the crashing waves of Persian soldiers, and in the center, a king who chose death over submission. Leonidas and his 300 became more than soldiers. They became immortal symbols of courage. That is why Leonidas, the Spartan king who stood with 300 against an empire, holds his place at number 4. Who reshaped the known world before turning 30. Born in 356 BCE, in the kingdom of Macedon, Alexander was the son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias. From the start, his life was marked by ambition and education. Tutored by Aristotle himself, Alexander absorbed philosophy, science, and politics, but it was on the battlefield where he would leave his mark. When Philip was assassinated in 336 BCE, Alexander, only 20 years old, ascended the throne. Few could have imagined that in just over a decade, he would create one of the largest empires in history. His first challenge was securing Greece. At the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE. Even before becoming king, Alexander had already proven himself, commanding cavalry that shattered the Thebans' sacred band. Once on the throne, he swiftly crushed revolts, then turned his eyes eastward to Persia, the great empire that had once tried to conquer Greece. In 334 BCE, Alexander launched his campaign against Persia with around 40,000 men. At the Battle of Granicus, he personally led a cavalry charge across a river against Persian satraps. It was the beginning of a string of victories that would cement his reputation. 2 years later, at Issus, Alexander faced King Darius III himself. Outnumbered, he broke the Persian line with his companion cavalry, sending Darius fleeing the field. Visualize the scenes: disciplined Macedonian phalanxes, advancing with sarissa spears over 18 feet long, while Alexander, at the head of his cavalry, smashed into enemy flanks. Maps of his campaigns stretch from Greece to Egypt, then across Mesopotamia and into Central Asia. At Gaugamela in 331 BCE, considered his masterpiece, Alexander faced Darius again. Despite being outnumbered, perhaps 5-1, Alexander used feints, gaps in the line, and a perfectly timed charge to pierce the Persian center. Darius fled once more, and Persia's empire collapsed. Within a few years, Alexander controlled lands from the Mediterranean to the Indus River. But Alexander was not just a conqueror. He was also a visionary who sought to fuse cultures. He founded over 20 cities, many named Alexandria, which became centers of trade, learning, and Hellenistic culture. In Egypt, he was hailed as a pharaoh. In Babylon, he adopted Persian dress and customs, marrying into local nobility and encouraging his officers to do the same. This blending of Greek and Eastern traditions created a cultural legacy that endured long after his empire fractured. Legends about Alexander grew even while he lived. He was said to be descended from Achilles, carrying a copy of the Iliad with him on campaign. Stories spread of him cutting the Gordian knot, a symbol that whoever untied it would rule Asia. Rather than untie it, he sliced through with his sword, declaring destiny fulfilled. Yet his empire was built on relentless ambition. His armies marched through deserts, mountains, and monsoons, driven by his will. At the Hyphasis River in India, after years of campaigning, his exhausted soldiers finally refused to go further. For the first time, Alexander turned back. In 323 BCE, at the height of his power, Alexander died suddenly in Babylon at just 32 years old. The cause remains uncertain: fever, poisoning, or illness. His empire, without a clear heir, fractured among his generals, sparking decades of conflict. Still, his legend endured. To the Greeks, he was a hero. To the Persians, a conqueror. To later cultures, almost a mythic figure. Statues, mosaics, and epic tales kept his memory alive as the man who sought to unite the world under one rule. Alexander's brilliance was not just his tactics, but his vision. He never lost a battle, combining speed, discipline, and daring in ways unmatched for centuries. He showed that with determination and strategy, even a small kingdom could topple the greatest empire of the age. That is why Alexander the Great, conqueror of the known world before turning 30, stands at number 3 on our list. This is number 2 on our list: Miyamoto Musashi, the master of the sword who never lost a duel. Born in 1584, Musashi grew up during Japan's turbulent Sengoku period, when warlords fought for control of the country. From an early age, he devoted himself to the way of the warrior. By the age of 13, he had already fought his first duel, defeating a trained swordsman with nothing more than a wooden staff. It was the beginning of a career that would make him the most famous duelist in Japanese history. Over his lifetime, Musashi is said to have fought in more than 60 official duels and countless battles, never once tasting defeat. Unlike many samurai, he often used unconventional tactics, turning the formality of dueling into opportunities to surprise and overwhelm his opponents. He believed victory was not about elegance, but effectiveness. One of his most famous encounters came against Sasaki Kajiro, a renowned swordsman celebrated for his deadly swallow cut. The duel was set on a remote island in 1612. Musashi arrived deliberately late, carrying a wooden sword he had carved from an oar during the boat ride. Kajiro, armed with his long blade, expected a traditional contest. Instead, Musashi rushed forward, striking his opponent's head with such force that the duel ended instantly. His choice of weapon, timing, and psychological pressure made it one of the most legendary victories in Japanese history. Visualize the scene: mist rolling over a quiet shoreline, two figures facing off, and the sharp crack of wood against steel as Musashi cemented his reputation as the greatest duelist of his era. Musashi's approach to combat was unique. He pioneered a style known as Nitten Ichiraya, the school of two heavens as one, which used two swords simultaneously, one long and one short. While most samurai relied on the traditional katana alone, Musashi trained to wield both, giving him versatility and unpredictability in battle. His philosophy was simple: adapt to the moment, and never let an opponent dictate the terms of a fight. Beyond the dueling ground, Musashi was also a strategist and philosopher. In his later years, he wrote the Book of Five Rings, a treatise on combat, discipline, and life itself. Divided into sections named after the elements earth, water, fire, wind, and void, the book laid out principles that extended far beyond swordsmanship. He taught that victory comes from awareness, adaptability, and a calm spirit in the face of chaos. Today, his words are studied not only by martial artists, but also by business leaders, military strategists, and philosophers around the world. Musashi lived much of his life as a wanderer, dueling, training, and seeking mastery of his art. He never married and avoided attachments, dedicating himself entirely to the path of the sword. By the time of his death in 1645, he had become a living legend, embodying the image of the Ronin, a masterless samurai who answered only to his own discipline and destiny. It's stories like his that keep history alive. If you're enjoying this countdown of hard-to-believe warriors, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss the conclusion to our list, where we reveal the #1 spot. Miyamoto Musashi's legacy remains unmatched. His duels, his philosophy, and his writings secured his place not just in Japanese culture but in world history. To this day, he symbolizes the fusion of warrior skill and philosophical depth, a reminder that true mastery lies not just in the sword, but in the mind. That is why Musashi, undefeated in 61 duels, holds the #2 spot on our list. This is #1 on our list, Achilles, the warrior, whose legend still defines what it means to fight. Unlike the others in this countdown, Achilles may not have walked the earth as a flesh and blood soldier. His story comes to us through myth, most famously in Homer's Iliad, the epic poem that has shaped Western ideas of heroism for nearly 3,000 years. Yet whether real or imagined, Achilles stands as the ultimate warrior, a man both blessed and cursed by greatness. According to legend, Achilles was the son of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea goddess. At his birth, his mother sought to make him immortal. In later traditions, she dipped him into the river Styx, rendering his body invincible, except for the heel by which she held him. From this comes the term Achilles' heel, a symbol of hidden vulnerability. Whether or not the tale was a later invention, the theme of near invincibility defines how Achilles was remembered. When the Trojan War broke out, Achilles joined the Greek army sailing across the Aegean to lay siege to Troy. Homer describes him as unmatched in speed, strength, and fury. His very presence enough to turn the tide of battle. Visualize the field before Troy's walls, chariots thundering across the plain, Greek ships pulled onto the shore, and at the center of it all, Achilles in gleaming armor, cutting through Trojan ranks like a force of nature. Yet, the Iliad makes clear that Achilles was not just a warrior, but a man torn by rage, pride, and fate. His conflict with Agamemnon, the Greek commander, led him to withdraw from battle, sulking in his tent while his comrades fell. Only when his beloved companion Patroclus was killed by Hector, Prince of Troy, did Achilles return. Consumed with grief and fury, he rejoined the fight with terrifying ferocity. The duel between Achilles and Hector is one of the most famous in all of literature. Achilles chased Hector 3 times around the walls of Troy before finally striking him down. In his wrath, he desecrated Hector's body, dragging it behind his chariot. The act horrified even the gods, showing that Achilles was both the greatest and most flawed of heroes. His own death came soon after. Accounts vary, but most agree that Paris, aided by Apollo, shot an arrow that struck Achilles in the heel, the one vulnerable spot on his body. The invincible warrior was undone by a single weakness. It was a fitting end to a figure who embodied both unstoppable strength and tragic fragility. The question remains, was Achilles real? Some historians believe he may have been inspired by an actual warrior of the Mycenaean age, whose deeds were magnified over centuries of oral storytelling. Others argue he was always a symbol, an ideal of martial excellence and the human struggle against mortality. In either case, his impact is undeniable. For millennia, soldiers, leaders, and poets have looked to Achilles as the archetype of the warrior, fearless, relentless, and bound by destiny. His legend has transcended cultures, appearing in Roman tales, medieval epics, Renaissance art, and modern literature. Even today, the phrase Achilles' heel reminds us that no matter how powerful someone may seem, everyone has a point of vulnerability. Picture again the battlefield of Troy, the clash of bronze against bronze, the cries of warriors, the dust rising into the sky, and among it all, Achilles part man, part myth, embodying the idea that true warriors are remembered not just for their victories, but for the stories they leave behind. And so we close our list. From Yasuke the African who rose to become a samurai, to Musashi, the undefeated master of the sword, and finally, to Achilles, whose legend still defines warrior spirit. These 10 figures remind us why history and myth alike celebrate those who defy the ordinary. Some were real, others perhaps imagined, but all earned a place as hard-to-believe warriors whose names continue to echo across time.